Before we begin, take 1 second and hit the subscribe button. This story is not just about Hollywood fame or legendary movies. It's about what happens after success, after decades of silence, when someone finally admits the truth they've carried for a lifetime. What Ron Howard revealed at 71 wasn't planned, polished, or dramatic. It was raw, unexpected, and deeply human. For most of his life, Ron Howard was known as the steady one. He didn't chase controversy, didn't fuel rumors, and didn't publicly criticize others in the industry. While Hollywood thrived on loud personalities and public feuds, Ron stayed quiet, calm, professional. He seemed untouched by the darker side of fame, almost immune to the chaos that swallowed so many careers around him. But behind that calm surface was a man who had learned very early that silence was sometimes the only way to survive. That silence finally cracked when devastating news involving Reiner surfaced. Ron didn't react like a celebrity issuing a statement. He reacted like someone who suddenly realized that time, something he had always assumed he could manage, was slipping away. The loss hit him harder than anyone expected, and it forced him to look backward in a way he never had before. Not just at Reiner, but at his own life, his choices, and the emotional cost of decades spent putting work first. To understand why this moment mattered so deeply, you have to understand Ron Howard's beginning. Ron did not enter Hollywood chasing a dream. He was born into it. Cameras, scripts, and studio schedules were part of his life before he could even understand what they meant. While most children were discovering the world through play, Ron was discovering it through rehearsals and takes. Fame wasn't something he earned later. It was something that shaped him from the very start. When the Andy Griffith Show premiered, Ron became a national symbol almost overnight. America didn't just watch him, it embraced him. As Opie Taylor, he represented innocence, safety, and the idea of a simpler world. But behind the scenes, his life looked nothing like the one viewers imagined. He studied in small rooms near sound stages, did homework between takes, and listened to other kids playing outside while he worked. The applause came easily, but normal childhood experiences quietly disappeared. Years later, Ron would describe that time as living in a golden cage. It was secure and privileged, but it was also isolating. He was protected, yet separated from the world he was supposed to be growing up in. That isolation planted something deep inside him, a belief that responsibility mattered more than feelings, and that showing up was more important than speaking out. As he grew older, the roles changed, but the expectations never stopped. When Happy Days made him famous all over again, the world saw success stacked on success. What they didn't see was how trapped Ron felt. Richie Cunningham was beloved, but Ron felt frozen inside a version of youth that no longer reflected reality. The country was changing, culture was shifting, and serious issues dominated headlines, yet the character he played existed in a bubble untouched by the world outside. Ron quietly tried to push for change. He didn't demand control or cause a scene. He simply asked for stories that acknowledged reality. Those requests were denied, and that rejection became a turning point. Ron realized that if he stayed in front of the camera, he would always be shaped by someone else's vision. If he wanted ownership over his life and his work, he had to move behind the camera. Directing became more than a career move. It became an escape. For the first time, Ron felt a sense of control over his own direction. He became known for discipline, preparation, and precision. He didn't intimidate crews or rule through fear. Instead, he demanded more from himself than anyone else ever could. Film after film, his reputation grew, and so did the pressure to deliver perfection. While audiences saw success, Ron felt something else quietly building in the background. Fear. Fear of failure. Fear of disappointing others, and fear of losing everything he had worked for. That fear pushed him into exhaustion. Long shoots, endless revisions, and relentless schedules became normal. At one point, his body simply gave out. It should have been a warning, but in Hollywood, slowing down is often treated as weakness. Ron kept going, even when the cost became personal. That cost was felt most deeply at home. There is one decision Ron Howard has spoken about with visible regret: choosing work over family during a long overseas production. While he was focused on delivering another film, his wife was raising their children alone. When he finally returned home, the moment that greeted him was devastating. His baby didn't recognize him, That realization cut deeper than any professional setback ever had. Years later, Ron admitted something that stunned many people. He said he would trade every award, every hit movie, and every career milestone just to get that lost time back. Success, he learned too late, does not protect you from regret. This is where Rob Reiner becomes more than just a name in the story. On the surface, Ron Howard and Rob Reiner appeared very different. Ron was private, measured, and cautious. Rob was outspoken, political, and unafraid of public confrontation. But beneath those differences was a shared understanding that only a few people possess. Both men grew up inside Hollywood. Both escaped acting by directing. And both understood how fame quietly demands sacrifices without ever asking permission. There was respect between them, but also distance. They traveled the same industry, faced similar pressures, and achieved enormous success, yet chose very different ways of navigating public life. Ron believed his work should speak for itself. Rob believed in speaking directly, even if it caused friction. Neither approach was wrong, but the contrast created an unspoken tension that lasted for decades. They were not rivals in the traditional sense, but they were never close either. Their relationship existed mostly in silence. That silence ended abruptly when shocking and violent news involving Rob Reiner surfaced. For Ron Howard, the loss was deeply unsettling, not just because a fellow filmmaker was gone, but because of how sudden and uncontrollable it was. It wasn't a quiet passing. It was chaotic, brutal, and final. For someone who had spent his entire life managing outcomes and perfecting details, this kind of ending was impossible to process. At the same time, Ron was already dealing with another emotional storm. His younger brother Clint, the one person who truly understood what it meant to grow up under studio lights, was facing serious health struggles. Clint wasn't just family. He was Ron's emotional anchor. They had shared a childhood few could understand, and now Ron found himself powerless to protect him. For the first time, there was no solution, no schedule to fix, no scene to rewrite. As Rob Reiner's tragic death collided with his brother's declining health, something inside Ron shifted. He began asking questions he had avoided his entire life. What was all of this work really for? What did success actually cost? And how much time had he unknowingly given away? In rare and emotional interviews, Ron finally admitted the truth. He spent decades telling other people's stories while neglecting his own. He realized that his silence, once a survival tool, had slowly become a burden. Rob Reiner's death forced him to confront the reality that legacy does not guarantee peace, and control is often an illusion. For the first time, Ron Howard stopped speaking like a director analyzing a career. He spoke like a man confronting loss, regret, and the painful understanding that some moments never come back. And that realization marked the beginning of a truth he could no longer keep quiet. The truth Ron Howard finally began to confront was not about one single event or one single person. It was about a lifetime of choices shaped by pressure, expectation, and silence. Rob Reiner's death did not create those questions, but it forced Ron to face them without distraction. For the first time, there was no film to prepare, no production schedule to hide behind, and no professional role to play. There was only reflection, and reflection can be uncomfortable when it arrives late. For decades, Ron Howard and Rob Reiner existed in the same Hollywood ecosystem, often mentioned in the same conversations, yet rarely connected on a personal level. Both had escaped the trap of being child actors by reinventing themselves as directors. Both had built reputations for intelligence and craft, but their philosophies could not have been more different. Ron believed deeply in restraint, in letting stories guide audiences without instruction. Rob believed in engagement, in using his voice openly and forcefully to shape cultural conversations. These differences created distance, not hostility, but a quiet separation that neither man ever addressed directly. That unspoken space between them lingered for years. They respected each other's work, crossed paths at industry events, and occasionally shared professional admiration, yet something always remained unsaid. Ron later admitted that he often avoided confrontation not because he lacked opinions, but because he had been trained since childhood to keep things smooth, calm, and controlled. Speaking out felt risky. Silence felt safer. Rob Reiner, on the other hand, seemed unafraid of risk, willing to absorb criticism if it meant standing for something publicly. When news broke of Rob Reiner's violent and shocking death, the contrast between those two philosophies suddenly felt meaningless. The debates, the differences, and the long silence were instantly overshadowed by the reality of loss. Ron Howard was deeply disturbed not only by the tragedy itself, but by how final it was. There would be no future conversations, no chance to bridge the distance, no opportunity to say the things that had remained unsaid for decades. Those close to Ron say this realization weighed heavily on him. He began revisiting old memories, not just of Rob, but of his own life. He thought about how many relationships he had managed carefully instead of emotionally, how often he chose professionalism over honesty, and how many moments he assumed would still be there later. At the same time, Ron was watching his brother Clint struggle with serious health issues. Clint, the one constant presence throughout his life, was no longer strong in the way Ron remembered. For a man who built a career on control and preparation, this helplessness was terrifying. Ron could not direct this situation. He could not fix it with hard work or discipline. He could only sit with it, and that forced stillness made everything louder. In interviews, Ron admitted that this period changed how he views success entirely. He no longer measures his life by box office numbers or awards. He measures it by time, by presence, and by the relationships he once took for granted. Rob Reiner's death made that shift unavoidable. It became a reminder that even powerful, influential people are not protected from sudden endings. Ron also reflected on how Hollywood trains people to delay emotional honesty. There is always another project, another deadline, another reason to postpone difficult conversations. For years, Ron believed there would be time later. Later to slow down, later to reconnect, later to speak openly. Rob's death shattered that illusion. For the first time, Ron spoke publicly about how much the industry encourages silence under the disguise of professionalism. He acknowledged that staying quiet often came at a personal cost, not because he disagreed with Rob Reiner's views, but because he never allowed himself to fully engage, to challenge, or to connect beyond surface-level respect. That distance now felt heavier than any disagreement ever could have. As Ron entered his 70s, he made deliberate changes. He began turning down long, demanding projects that required extended time away from home. He stepped back from constant production cycles and allowed others to take on responsibilities he once insisted on handling himself. Even his production company shifted to operate more independently, giving him the freedom to prioritize family over output. In one of his most emotional admissions, Ron said something that surprised many fans. He explained that slowing down was not peaceful at first. It was uncomfortable. Silence without work to fill it forced him to confront regrets he had avoided for years. But over time, that silence became necessary. It allowed him to finally tell his own story instead of endlessly shaping someone else's. Rob Reiner's death also reshaped how Ron thinks about legacy. He realized that being remembered for great films means little if the people closest to you feel distant or unheard. Rob lived loudly, passionately, and publicly. Ron lived carefully, quietly, and privately. Both approaches came with costs, but only one thing was clear now. Neither path guaranteed more time. In private conversations, Ron reportedly expressed deep sorrow not just for Rob and his wife, but for their children, especially the daughter who discovered them. That detail haunted him. It stripped away all celebrity and status and reduced the tragedy to its most human form. A family shattered, a moment no one can recover from. If this story moved you, or if Ron Howard's reflections made you think about time, family, or the moments we postpone, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep, honest stories about the people who shaped our world beyond the spotlight, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because some truths are worth telling, even if they arrive late.